Absence carries a strange weight, heavier than presence, deeper than noise, and more powerful than any words that could be spoken. When something is constantly available, it blends into the background of awareness, taken for granted as though it were part of the air itself. But when it is withdrawn, when it vanishes without explanation or announcement, it suddenly expands in the imagination of the one who notices its loss. That which was overlooked becomes magnified, and what once felt ordinary transforms into something rare, precious, and even haunting. Absence creates a kind of gravity, an invisible pull that drags attention toward the empty space left behind, and it is in that emptiness that true value is revealed. The mind is restless by design. It craves answers, clarity, and closure. When something disappears or withdraws, the mind cannot leave it alone. It circles back again and again, revisiting the last memory, replaying the last interaction, questioning what might have caused the silence. In presence, attention may waver, but in absence, attention becomes obsession. The imagination, deprived of direct input, begins to invent, to create stories, to project meanings onto the void. And because these imagined narratives are often more intense than reality, the withdrawn thing grows larger than life in the mind of the one who longs for it. This is why absence wields such power in human dynamics. A person who is constantly available, constantly explaining, constantly showing up, offers no room for wonder. But the one who withdraws strategically allows curiosity to fester, allows longing to sharpen, and allows space for desire to stretch far beyond what presence alone could inspire. It is not that absence itself is attractive, but that absence magnifies what is already there. It turns a whisper into an echo, a gesture into a symbol, a brief look into an unforgettable moment. Consider the way memory works. The events we remember most vividly are often the ones cut short, interrupted, or left incomplete. The movie that ended on a cliffhanger stays in the mind longer than the one that tied every thread neatly. The conversation that was never finished haunts more than the one that dragged on until exhaustion. It is the lack of closure, the unanswered question, the unresolved ending that sticks like a thorn in the mind, making absence feel heavier than presence ever did. The same principle applies in attraction, influence, and power. When you withhold at the moment others expect you to give, when you step back instead of stepping forward, when you let silence speak instead of words, you plant a seed of hunger that grows in the soil of uncertainty. Absence also reshapes perception of time. Moments of constant interaction blur together, losing their edges. But when contact is broken, when presence is withheld, the moments that did exist become highlighted, replayed, and analyzed in slow motion. Every detail suddenly feels important. The tone of a word, the angle of a glance, the way a pause hung between sentences. This magnification turns fragments into symbols, and the absence that follows frames them in significance. What was once ordinary becomes extraordinary simply because it is no longer accessible. Yet absence must be wielded with care. Too much absence can dissolve into indifference, but the right measure creates intensity. It is the tension of scarcity, the balance of giving just enough to be remembered yet withdrawing enough to be missed. This is where the true weight lies, not in the complete vanishing, but in the strategic withholding, the deliberate silence, the refusal to be constantly consumed. The weight of absence is felt most strongly when presence was once tasted, when something real was offered but then pulled away. It is that contrast, the sudden shift from fullness to emptiness, that creates the deepest gravity. What is withdrawn gains more gravity than what is constantly present, because the human heart values what it cannot easily hold. It longs for what is just out of reach. It clings to what slips away. It elevates what it cannot fully possess. Presence can delight, but absence can haunt, and haunting leaves a deeper mark than delight. Ever could mystery is a force that has captivated human beings for as long as history has been recorded. It is not what is revealed that holds the greatest influence, but what is concealed, what is left unsaid, what lingers in the shadows beyond explanation. The mind is a restless machine, never content with blank spaces, always compelled to fill them. When details are missing, when reasons are withheld, when answers are avoided, the imagination takes command. And imagination, unlike reality, has no boundaries. It can create, exaggerate, and magnify until the unknown becomes more powerful than the truth ever could be. The less explained, the stronger the pull. Certainty closes the door, but uncertainty keeps it open. When everything is laid out in plain sight, the mystery evaporates, and with it, much of the fascination. A magician who reveals every trick ceases to astonish. A story that explains every detail loses its echo in the mind. A person who rushes to clarify every action, every word, every decision, strips away the very aura that could have kept them unforgettable. It is the unknown that creates anticipation. It is the unanswered question that lingers, and it is the gap between what is seen and what is hidden that gives rise to power. The human imagination does not settle for silence, it invents. It takes fragments and builds worlds, takes gestures and spins meanings, takes pauses and interprets them as signs. What is withheld becomes a canvas, and the imagination paints it with colors of its own choosing. In this way, mystery becomes more potent than fact, because the mind will often create a story far more intense than reality. A glance becomes a signal, a delay becomes a strategy, a half smile becomes a confession. All of this arises not from what was said, but from what was left unsaid. Power, in this sense, is not in the delivery of information, but in the control of it. To know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to reveal and when to conceal is to command the rhythm of another's thoughts. People hunger for certainty, but they are more deeply moved by curiosity. Curiosity keeps them coming back, keeps them replaying, keeps them wondering. It is the hook in the mind that never quite comes loose, the itch that cannot be fully scratched. And once curiosity has taken root, obsession follows closely behind. Mystery also reshapes time and attention. What is clear is quickly consumed and discarded, but what is mysterious lingers. It does not end when the moment ends, it continues to echo long after. A simple phrase left incomplete, a gesture left unexplained, a sudden withdrawal without comment. These things grow larger in absence. They expand, replayed over and over, gaining intensity not because of what they were, but because of what they refuse to clarify. That refusal is the birthplace of intrigue. Even in history and literature, the figures who endure are those shrouded in mystery. Leaders who never revealed their full hand, artists who never explained their creations, thinkers who spoke in riddles instead of direct answers, they endure because mystery resists conclusion. Once something is fully explained, it belongs to the past. But as long as it resists explanation, it remains alive in the present, growing in the imagination of those who seek to understand it. The less explained, the more the imagination works to fill the gap, and the imagination is tireless. It refuses to rest until it has filled the silence with meaning, even if that meaning is exaggerated or entirely fabricated. Mystery is power because it hands control to the one who withholds, while leaving the other captive to their own restless thoughts. It is not what is revealed that enslaves the mind, but what is hidden, what is suggested, what is never fully confirmed or denied. That is the power that keeps attention bound, that makes absence feel heavier than presence, and that transforms the ordinary into something unforgettable. Control is often mistaken for dominance of voice, for the ability to speak louder, longer, and with more force than others. Yet true control is rarely found in noise. It is found in restraint, in the stillness that unsettles, in the silence that forces awareness. Silence disciplines in ways that words never can, because words can be resisted, argued with, or dismissed, while silence leaves no surface to fight against. It seeps into the mind, creates tension, and turns inward, making the other wrestle not with an external command, but with themselves. When confronted with silence, the human mind becomes restless. Words provide direction, explanations, and even excuses. They tell the listener what to think and often give them a way to reject or reinterpret the message. But silence denies that. It does not hand over answers, does not provide a narrative, does not close the loop. Instead, it forces the other person to create their own explanations. And the explanations that arise from within are always more convincing than those imposed from outside. The silence of disapproval, the pause that refuses to fill the air, the withheld reaction, these cut deeper than lectures because they leave the burden of meaning entirely on the one experiencing it. Lectures often lose their weight through excess. The more words are piled on, the easier they are to tune out. The listener may nod, pretend to agree, or simply detach. But silence cannot be tuned out. It echoes in the mind long after the moment has passed. The absence of sound sharpens awareness. Every glance, every breath, every second of waiting grows heavier. What is unsaid gathers more force than what could ever be said aloud. Consider authority figures throughout life. A parent's long speech may fade into background noise, but a single look, followed by silence, often achieves more. The child fills that silence with their own guilt, their own recognition of what went wrong. A leader who does not rush to justify or explain, but holds silence instead communicates certainty. That pause forces others to lean in, to pay attention, to doubt themselves. Silence becomes a mirror, reflecting the insecurities and errors of those confronted with it. Discipline through words often feels external imposed and therefore resented. But discipline through silence feels internal, self-imposed, and therefore lasting. When no words are given, the mind is left to interpret and judge itself. This is why silence is such a powerful form of correction. It does not just demand obedience, it cultivates self-awareness. The one facing silence must confront their own conscience, and that confrontation is far more punishing than any lecture could be. In relationships, silence communicates boundaries more effectively than arguments. An argument can spiral into counter-arguments, excuses, and justifications, but silence draws an unmistakable line. It says without saying this is unacceptable. It shifts the weight of responsibility onto the other person, forcing them to reflect, to reach their own conclusions, and to adjust their behavior if they wish to regain connection. Silence in this sense is not withdrawal out of weakness, but control through presence without noise. Even in conflict, silence can dismantle aggression more effectively than retaliation. To respond with anger only feeds anger, but to remain calm, still, and silent removes fuel from the fire. The aggressor begins to feel the weight of their own words echoing back at them, unchallenged but also unsupported. This lack of response destabilizes them, leaving them to face their own excess. Silence becomes both shield and weapon, disarming without striking. Control without words is not about passivity, but about mastery. It requires strength to resist the impulse to explain, to justify, to argue. It requires patience to let silence do its work. But the effect is undeniable. Silence holds authority because it cannot be interrupted, it cannot be twisted, it cannot be undone by counter-speech. It forces others inward, disciplines them through their own thoughts, and leaves a deeper mark than any lecture ever could. Human nature has always been governed by the law of scarcity. The value of anything rises not simply from its qualities, but from its availability, or rather its unavailability. What is abundant becomes ordinary, overlooked, and taken for granted. What is rare becomes sacred, treasured, and pursued with intensity. This truth is not confined to material possessions. It governs attention, time, presence, and affection just as much as gold, jewels, or treasures. Scarcity breeds value because the human mind attaches worth to that which it cannot easily obtain, and it dismisses what it can acquire without effort. When something is always present, it becomes invisible. Like air, it sustains life but is rarely noticed until it is absent. The same is true of people and their offerings. Words repeated too often lose their weight, gestures given too freely lose their meaning, and availability without limits loses its magnetism. Yet when those same words are withheld, when gestures are rare, when presence is rationed, they become precious. A single look, a single touch, a single moment of attention can feel extraordinary simply because it is not guaranteed. Scarcity heightens awareness, sharpening the senses to appreciate what little is given. The psychology of scarcity is rooted in desire. Desire thrives on tension, on the distance between what is wanted and what is possessed. When something is scarce, that tension stretches, intensifies, and sharpens the hunger to pursue it. It is not always the object itself that creates longing, but the difficulty of access. A diamond and a pebble are both stones, but one is rare and therefore priceless, while the other, found in abundance, is ignored. The same principle applies to human interaction. The time of one who is constantly available feels cheap, but the time of one who guards their hours, who gives them selectively, feels valuable, even sacred. Scarcity also triggers imagination. When something is rarely given, the mind begins to anticipate it, to romanticize it, to attach meaning beyond its reality. A simple gesture may be interpreted as profound if it occurs only once in a while. The imagination magnifies rarity into significance. This is why the most remembered moments are not the endless stream of interactions, but the unique, fleeting instances that stand out. A rare smile, a rare word of approval, a rare sign of affection leaves a deeper mark than constant repetition ever could. There is also power in measured absence. By not offering everything freely, one creates space for longing to grow. That longing turns ordinary acts into extraordinary experiences. The drink of water is most appreciated not when one is always quenched, but when thirst is at its peak. The same law applies to presence and attention. When these are withheld, they build thirst, and when they are finally offered, they feel like a gift, not a routine. This gift, like quality, cannot be manufactured by abundance. It can only be created by scarcity. Scarcity breeds not only value, but also loyalty. What is difficult to attain is fiercely protected once acquired. People guard most what they struggled hardest to obtain. This is why relationships, opportunities, or treasures that come easily are often discarded, while those that required effort, patience, or sacrifice are held tightly. Scarcity imprints effort into memory, and effort transforms into attachment. What is rarely given becomes priceless because the human heart measures worth not by what is plentiful, but by what is scarce. The economy of desire is built on limitation. In a world overflowing with noise, abundance, and constant accessibility, it is the rare that shines brightest, the withheld that carries weight, and the scarce that becomes unforgettable. Words once spoken often vanish quickly into the air, heard for a moment, and then drowned out by the flood of everything else demanding attention. Yet what is left unsaid, what hangs suspended in silence, carries a different kind of weight. It echoes. It does not fade when the moment ends, it reverberates in the mind, circling back, replaying, growing louder with every repetition. This is the echo effect, the strange power of silence to last longer than speech, to carve deeper impressions than declarations, to haunt the imagination in ways words never can. When someone speaks, the listener processes, reacts, and moves on. Words bring clarity, but clarity also brings closure. Once something is explained, the mind files it away, satisfied that it understands. But when something is withheld, when an answer is not given, when a sentence stops short, the mind cannot rest. It turns over the fragment again and again, searching for meaning. What does it signify? Why was it left incomplete? What truth was hidden behind the silence? In this search, the unsaid becomes louder than anything that could have been spoken. The echo effect thrives on ambiguity. A look that goes unexplained lingers far longer than 1,000 reassurances. A pause in conversation, left hanging without explanation, stirs more unease than a direct statement ever could. The human brain abhors gaps. It craves completion. So when silence leaves a gap, the imagination rushes to fill it. And in filling it, the imagination often exaggerates, amplifies, or distorts until the echo becomes more powerful than the original sound. The unsaid grows into an obsession precisely because it cannot be resolved. This is why silence often disciplines more effectively than confrontation. A rebuke spelled out in detail may sting for a moment, but a quiet withdrawal, a look without words, a pause without explanation burrows deeper. The one on the receiving end becomes trapped in their own thoughts, replaying every action, every word, trying to locate the cause. The silence forces them inward, and in that inner dialogue, they often punish themselves far more than any spoken words could have. The echo effect makes them both the judge and the judged, trapped in a cycle of self-reflection that is impossible to escape. In attraction, the same principle applies. What is said may be charming, but what is left unsaid is magnetic. Mystery is born from the unsaid, and mystery feeds desire. A confession given too easily satisfies curiosity, but a hint without explanation, a gesture without words, leaves the other replaying it endlessly. The echo grows stronger each time it returns to the mind, until the imagination attaches far more weight to the moment than it ever carried in reality. The unsaid becomes larger than life, and in that enlargement, it exerts control. The echo effect also gives permanence. Words may be forgotten, but silence is remembered. An unanswered question, an unfinished story, an incomplete conversation. All of these live on long after ordinary exchanges fade. The lack of conclusion anchors them in memory. They are revisited, reanalyzed, reinterpreted, often with more intensity than when they first occurred. Each replay strengthens the echo until the silence is louder than any speech could ever be. This is the paradox of communication. Clarity ends thought, while ambiguity extends it. What is spoken closes the loop, but what is unsaid keeps it open, allowing it to echo endlessly. The echo effect is the art of letting silence speak louder than words, of understanding that absence has a voice of its own, and that what lingers longest in the human mind is not what was heard, but what was withheld. Distance has always been one of the most paradoxical forces in human connection. While closeness provides comfort, distance creates longing. To step back is not always to weaken a bond. Often, it is the very act that strengthens it. There is an invisible thread that ties people together, woven out of curiosity, desire, and imagination. When distance is introduced, that thread is pulled taut, and what was once taken for granted becomes something worth casing. Pursuit is not born out of abundance, but out of scarcity, not out of constant presence, but out of the mysterious withdrawal that awakens need. The mind is wired to chase what is slipping away. When something is always available, the sense of urgency disappears. The abundance makes it ordinary, something that can be delayed, postponed, or ignored. But the moment it is withdrawn, the moment it steps back, the mind perceives a potential loss, and the fear of loss is far more motivating than the comfort of possession. Distance awakens this instinct, igniting the drive to reclaim what feels as though it is moving out of reach. In this way, stepping back creates forward movement from the other side. Distance also magnifies value. The rarest treasures are always guarded most fiercely, not because they are necessarily more useful, but because they are harder to obtain. The same principle applies to presence and attention. When they are offered constantly, they blur into the background, but when they are withdrawn, they gain weight. A brief interaction feels more meaningful, a rare gesture feels more precious, a short moment of attention feels more significant. By stepping back, one increases the perceived value of every step forward because the scarcity intensifies desire. Curiosity is another powerful force triggered by distance. When someone steps back, questions arise. Why? What does it mean? What is happening behind the curtain of silence or absence? The imagination, restless and unwilling to accept gaps, begins to fill in the unknown with stories. And these stories, born from curiosity, often inflate the importance of the one who has stepped back. In this way, distance multiplies presence rather than diminishes it, because it forces the other person to carry that presence in their thoughts, replaying it, trying to solve the puzzle. Pursuit born of distance is not merely physical but psychological. The act of stepping back creates space for the other person to invest. It draws them forward, not by force, but by invitation hidden in absence. It places the burden of motion on them, shifting the dynamic entirely. Instead of chasing, one becomes chased. Instead of clinging, one becomes the anchor the other reaches toward. This reversal is subtle yet powerful, achieved not through effort but through restraint. Even in history, leaders, artists, and thinkers who kept distance from the masses cultivated greater intrigue than those constantly accessible. The rare public appearance, the carefully chosen word, the deliberate withholding of full access created pursuit on a grand scale. People leaned in, desperate for more, precisely because they were given less. This law of distance operates the same way in personal dynamics. The harder something is to reach, the deeper the desire to pursue it. Distance does not mean detachment, but deliberate space. Too much absence can dissolve connection entirely, yet the right measure creates tension, energy, and pursuit. It is in that delicate balance that the invisible thread grows stronger. By stepping back at the right moment, one transforms from the seeker into the sought, from the pursuer into the pursued. Distance pulls others forward, not through force, but through the natural gravity of curiosity and desire, proving that sometimes the most powerful move is not to advance, but to retreat just enough for pursuit to begin